Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Miguel Caballero. Welcome to the show, Miguel.
Hi, Simon. How are you doing today?
Brilliant. Yeah, let's not pretend. Let's pretend we haven't been talking about what were you saying? You were saying some friend had house had been broken into, and a Spanish friend, and they nicked the ham. They nicked the jamon iberico and left the laptops. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a value proposition like anything else.
Yeah. So Miguel is a fellow adoptee, and he also runs an incredible provides an incredible service for fellow adoptees in the addiction space. So you run it's weekly meetings, isn't it, on Zoom that you?
It's a weekly Zoom meeting. It's called Adoptees Addiction. It's for any adoptee going up against any addiction. It's not an official 12-step group. We're on Zoom. It's about an hour. We borrow from a lot of like AA style traditions. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, like, my friend Lily, she helped launch this group. It's her meeting as much as anyone else's. And then the adoptees that show up and participate and are of service, it's definitely not a one-man show, which is one of the big precepts of 12-step.
Yeah. Yeah. So the only knowledge I have of AA is what I gather from watching too many cop shows, because there's always an alcoholic, isn't there? Detectives in any cop show, there's always whether that's British or American, there's always one alcoholic. But clearly, addiction is a big issue, and I'm so glad that you and Lily are tackling this head on. We have had recovering people in recovery on the show, the fantastic Pamela Karanova. She talked about her journey, and I would encourage. I'm going to put a link actually onto Pam's interview from a couple of months back, because it's a brilliant one. So I was checking out Miguel's the website for the organization, I guess, loosely organization we could call it, and something really leapt off my page, and on a blog post that you wrote like 2.5 years ago, and so there's links to this on the show notes, listeners. So this is something that you wrote back in September 2020. And it's called My Journey as an Alcoholic and an Adoptee. So I'm just going to read a couple of sentences from this, and then I'll ask you a question. So, okay. So before there was my adoption, there was my relinquishment. Interesting distinction that I think we sometimes lose. Yeah, the two things, the loss and the gain, right? And here's something I have believed about myself since I was a child, since before I knew I was an alcoholic. My birth mother took one look at me and knew that I was worthless and unlovable and unredeemable. She didn't want to keep me because she knew something was wrong with me. And then you put in brackets, I know that this absolutely isn't true, that my birth mother loved me very much and made a very difficult choice. But this is what I have told myself. Epic understatement and summation of the whole shebang, right, Miguel?
Yeah, it's it's sort of the origin story. I was just thinking just now about like the trope of policemen being in like 12-step AA recovering alcoholics. Like, their problem is that they've seen so much shit and seen so much horrific humanity that they're drinking. My problem is that I was relinquished. That's an oversimplification. There's genetics at play. But yeah, I've always thought that about myself. I always knew on some level, no one ever said it, that something was wrong with me. And it's a tough way to go through life. It really is. And I don't think I'm unique in having this thought. I think sometimes it's not articulated. But yeah, I just somewhere in my core, I always knew this to be true. And it wasn't until I came across the primal wound when I was like 24 or 25 that I started to put things together a little bit about like, oh, there are reasons for it.
Yeah.
And
yeah, sorry, I interrupted you.
it's when you feel that way, you're just sort of already screwed. So why not do this slightly bad thing? Why not, overeat? Why not have too much sex? Why not drink yourself into oblivion? Like, what's the alternative? You're gonna feel horrible about yourself, so why not improve it in some small way?
Yeah. I think you're totally right. I think you articulated it. Your articulation was spot on the money, is spot on the money, on the basis of stuff I've thought and felt and believed, and what I've heard from others for the show, in the conversations before the show. So I've got a big question for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you still believe that?
On some molecular level, yes. And through conscious and logical and even some emotional levels, no. I don't think that. However, what I had learned is that my birth mother hid her pregnancy from everybody, and that I've never spoken to her, but my understanding from her family, she's incredibly ashamed about it. And I like to say, because it's very clear, but I was marinated in amniotic shame. That was my home for 9 months. And so I think that gets into you. I think the body does keep score, and there's some, a lot of smarter people than I can go into the research on how that all works. But I think on some level, like that was the foundation of my life. It wasn't, hey, we're going to play some Tchaikovsky across my belly in order to make the baby smarter. It was, we're going to be horrified and ashamed and terrified anybody would find out about this thing in my belly. And that has some consequences.
Yeah. Have you heard my football score analogy based
No,
on Bessel van der Kolk, right? Yeah. The body keeps the score. Yeah. Adoptees' bodies keep the score for sure. Trauma scores first, right?
Yeah.
Trauma scores first before anything, right? Within the first, I guess, within the first 9 months, really. Yeah. If it's ambiotic or whatever the word you use, fantastic. The marinating in it, shit, that's bad. 9 months of marinating in it. So yeah, trauma scores first for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so it goes 1-0. It takes an early lead.
Mm-hmm.
Trauma takes an early lead, but by coming together, Adoptees United, right?
Yeah.
Teamwork makes the dream work, and before we know it, we go to before we know it, we level up. So we go evens 1-1, and then we romp away into the sunset with a 10-1 away from victory. How about that?
Amazing. You are the adoptee Ted Lasso.
Ted Lasso, yeah. Wow, that's just finished, hasn't it?
It has. I did some marketing for the show, so it's very steeped in my brain.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's we're starting that life with this deficit, and you suddenly find yourself in your 30s or your 40s for the most part, and you suddenly it's the fog. But then on top of that, as an addict, you've been adding layers to the fog by drinking. You're not helping clear it up. You're actually in any way making it worse. And of course, all this is not a hard and fast rule. It's but when you, I'll use I statements. When I was drinking, what I was doing was blocking a lot of the pain. And I didn't know that, but on an understanding level, but I was not running away from my feelings and running away from being present and running away from dealing this grief that I was dealing with anyways. I was really sad. And I was able to process some of it while I was drinking, but not as quickly as I would have if I'd been sober. And then I will say that, getting sober and being able to participate in 12-step groups, then being able to participate in this adoptees world and the Adoptees Addiction meeting, that helps make everything better faster. And it's not a linear process. In fact, it can be very difficult, and there's stops and starts and setbacks. But on a long-term look at the scale of being sober, it goes upward over time. Like your life gets better.
Yeah.
And being able to help the other adoptees, the Adoptees United, we're even like a separate under 18 squad. I don't know. I'm not great at football analogies. We're able to help each other. And, the biggest thing for me about the 12-step rooms that I really like, and I do have some issues with them. There's a line in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which says, no matter how far down the scale we have gone, we can see how our experience will be helpful to others. And knowing that the things that I suffered through and that were hard, instead of having to be ashamed of them, I'm able to use those to help other people and to connect with other people. It's not a miracle, but there's a sense of grace there, that somehow my hardest moments can help somebody else that is going through their hardest moments. Is just, it's the best part about 12-step groups, other than not killing yourself with the thing that was killing you. But being able to care for other people and being able to be present for other people in a way that says they're not worthless because of their addiction, because it says they're worth loving, that it says there's something fundamentally good about them no matter what they've been through. Those things are what I always wanted for myself. And I think it's in giving that away to other people, there's a chance for some really profound growth. And it just, I tell this, we're going to date ourselves here, but the movie As Good as It Gets with Jack Nicholson and Helen Hunt, I'm sure it's horrifically problematic if you were to watch it today, but that's a different podcast. He says to her, "You make me want to be a better man." And I always wanted to be a better man, but I had no idea how. I didn't know how to achieve that sort of thing. And starting my life the way I did, with that feeling that there's worthless, like I especially didn't know how I could be a better man. And I think the 12 steps and 12-step rooms and support groups, those have all given me a place in which I can hopefully be a better man, and just be there for other people. And that's a profoundly good thing in my life.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of different ways I could go from that. First off, have you heard of a guy called Robert Dilts?
Robert
Dilts.
I have not.
Yeah. He's got it's a bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Mm-hmm. Which has self-actualization on the top, and does Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah, I'm just thinking back to 1987 when I decided to do the psychology elective at college, and I thought, this is going to explain everything. It explained absolutely nothing. Anyway, yeah, there's Robert Dilts' model at the top that so it's a pyramid, but at the top we've got above the top of the pyramid, or even floating in the space above the pyramid, is meaning, right? Meaning. So our to put it more prosaically, I never use a word like prosaic. The shit that we've been through becomes somebody else's manure. Yeah. Our mess becomes our message. Yeah. This Robert Dilts guy is worth checking out. Checking out his little pyramid, because it's nice. Sorry, it's a nice, simple, clear. Well, 12 steps, step by step. There aren't 6 steps. There aren't 12 steps. There aren't 12 layers in the pyramid. But it very succinctly puts this the importance of what backs up the importance of what you're saying, and confirms that. The next thing, whilst I'm talking about steps and ladders and metaphors and pyramids and stuff, is have you heard of? I've talked about this quite a lot on the show. Have you heard of a guy called David Hawkins? He was Sedona. He was big guy in Sedona. He came up with through kinesiology, he came up with a scale of human consciousness, which is essentially how to be a better person, and it goes from 0 to 1,000. And the seminal work is Power versus Force. And it basically categorizes everything from, so 0 is dead. 20, the next thing to dead is shame, right? So it's a really disempowered place to be, right? Yeah. And then it goes up through fear, anger, to 200, where it becomes life affirming. So until 200, it's life detracting, but above 200, it is life affirming, and it goes up to 1,000. So from what I've heard people talk about Bill W and AA and stuff, so they would be up at the top range. This is profound, but it sets out almost like this scale of human consciousness allows us to calibrate where we are and hold different things, right? So if you take and the memory that always comes to my mind is, because I've heard it, it's something like pride is 180, right? So you take and as well as watching American cop shows, I watch, I'm a fan of The Wire and those sorts of shows. Sopranos, The Wire was way better than Sopranos in my opinion.
I just rewatched the whole thing earlier this year.
Of The Wire, yeah. So there's two. There's probably, this is a mass simplification and probably highly racist, right? But if we look at Baltimore, where The Wire is set, there are very few options for those people in the projects. And so they might be the next Air Jordan. Have you watched the Air film on Netflix yet? With it's the story of from Nike, inside Nike, the story of the story of the creation of the Air Jordan brand. So they've got that. There's a route out through athletic excellence. There's a route out. There's a route out through military, right? So you take a kid from the projects. They've grown up in an area where there's lots of addiction and lots of shame, and then they put them in a uniform, and this is where a lot of British service personnel come from as well, right? I'm not pinning this just on an American thing. So they come from an area of 20, which is shame, and they are catapulted forward, and their life changes from within. It changes completely, but they go around the world, and sometimes they have to kill people. So it's not life affirming, you know. Yeah, join the world and kill other people.
Parts of it, yeah.
Yeah. So this scale of human consciousness is a very profound book, and something that I learned a lot from, because it gives us it's like a scale for where we are. You know, you get on the scales to see how you're doing with your weight. You plug into this scale of consciousness for how you're doing with your level of consciousness. And I'm going to finish with a bit of a weird question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What if we are not our molecules?
Mm-hmm.
We are not our molecules.
Sure. A lot of ways to go for that.
Yeah, go for it.
They're thinking just of consciousness and the soul and all the various things. Like,
Yeah.
are we more than just our synapses firing electrical pulses to make us think things?
Yes.
Yeah. I would not disagree. So we're more than our molecules, but those are also the foundational aspects, and that's the groove in the record. And it's very, very difficult to move out of that groove. It's not impossible, but change is not easy. It's not easy and like at all. And my joke about change is like, the only change I want is slightly positive incremental change. Anything else I don't want. Like, if you want to hand me $100 million through the lottery, I mean, I would take it. But that's too big a change for me. Like, let's give me an extra $10,000 a year for the next 20 years. That I can handle. But if it's like, a humongous change, like, I don't want to move from my okay apartment into a mansion. I would. And I also don't want to, like, lose everything and be on the street. So negative change is no good. But I struggle a lot with change. I find it very hard, the getting sober notwithstanding. I don't, here's what it is. I don't want the feedback on something I'm trying to change, because there's still a part of me that knows the feedback will be, you're not good enough, you're not lovable. And it's even in things that I'm talented at. I on some level just don't want to risk that. I don't want to risk myself in showing what I really want. And some of that is just a human, some of that could be family of origin, some of that could be adoptee stuff. It's not all, it doesn't have to all be one thing. But to go back to the premise, if we're not our molecules, then we all have the ability to change, no matter how hard it is. And as human beings, I think we want to kind of find our comfortable place and stay there. It's like, oh, this place, because you go back like a bioevolutionary, well, this place has lots of berries and some easy meat. Why would we leave if we don't have to?
Yeah. So you've already seen lots of, it sounds like you've already seen lots of incremental change. You've seen a lot of change in a lot of little steps, it sounds like.
I have. I'm 50 years old, and I'm trying to understand the next 20 years of my life. And I actually hired somebody from Sedona, who is a change strategist life coach, to look at, like, what do I want to be for these years? And it's going to involve some change. And she understands change on so many different levels and where my barriers are, that it's like very, very interesting. I think what I really liked about the 12 steps was that there was a plan. and there is a way out of it. And I think to a large degree, what's missing out there in adoptee circles, and I'm sure there's somebody who's done it, but is the plan to get out of all of that. You know, look, I love Nancy Berry. I think what she did was amazing. The Primal Wound is amazing. I was so disappointed in the sequel. The Coming Home to Self didn't, I looked at it, I was like, this doesn't give me the path. And I was so expecting there to be as clear a path and a compassionate understanding as the Primal Wound was perceptive. I was expecting that from Coming Home to Self. And there are a lot of really great things she says in there, but I also think it's somewhat condescending to her daughter, who she was very frustrated with. But, you know, a guy named David Bowl, who I would highly recommend talking to. He works in the addiction space. He's a trained therapist. He runs a support group that's somewhat similar to the Adoptees and Addiction meeting. And I'll get you that name and the info later. He wrote kind of a monograph on addiction and being an adoptee. And I think he was getting at it, but I think there's a need for some more easily understandable, sanctioned, walkable path for adoptees. Like, it would be so nice to have that textbook. And look, if there's 4 different people who have 4 different routes for it, like, hey, that would be great. Just to like say, hey, try the Simon method and see if that works for you. And someone could try it and find out, well, okay, I am not my molecules, and that works for person A, and then person B doesn't work for, but they go and they check out my book, or they go and check out Lily's book, or they check out Pam's book. Like, I think that path forward, we focus so much on the like hurt and the pain and the story of like coming to grips with the adoption, with the relinquishment, with the trauma, with finding our birth parents, with not finding our birth parents. I think most stories stop there, and they don't. That next part is something I wish. Let me just more I statements. I wish that I had a plan to follow that really made sense for me. Like I would love that. I hope that somewhere amongst all the people in the addiction and adoption space, we can figure out some sort of roadmap, whether it's an essay, whether it's a course. Like, not looking to make money at it, but just like trying to give somebody some hope that there's a path forward into newer, bigger, and better things, or at least just into a better feeling of who you are and your place in the world.
What do you think drives change?
There are many great sayings in AA, one of which I love is, we learn at the speed of pain. And so when something gets too painful to deal with, then you're finally like, oh, okay, I'm ready to, you know, it could be a marriage that's falling apart. It could be you're super comfortable with being single and you're just realizing you don't want to be a 60-year-old man living by himself, because that gets you into hoarding. I think that's a different podcast. You know, when something's too painful and you have to stop it, that's when you start looking at the other things.
Yeah, I mean, I think pain can definitely lead somewhere, but I'm kind of but it's not the only. It's not the only precursor to change.
Yeah. You know, there's
in my opinion, and there is no Simon method, by the way, but there's a Simon philosophy. Yeah. And the only thing that I have found that drives change is insight.
Okay.
A sight from within.
Yeah.
And they may come about, that might come about in a what should we call it? A crisis moment. I love that. We learn at the speed of pain.
Yeah, there's I'd say 90% of the interesting wisdom things I say end up coming from 12-step rooms or from some cop shows. There's a moment of clarity is talked about a lot when we're facing up to an addiction, when you're like, oh, okay, I'm not just a problem drinker. I'm not just a binge drinker. I'm not just blowing off steam. Where you're just like, oh my God, this is who I am, and this is how bad the problem is. And that's usually a part of what is classically called a rock bottom, where you just understand that like this can't keep getting any worse, and I realize how bad I am, and I realize how much I need help. And that's, as you're saying, that's insight. That is, an insight to who you are. And it's once you have that insight, it's hard to unsee it.
So I'm going to talk about my addiction to nicotine. So I started, my dad was rabid anti-smoker, ex-smoker, and gave me 200 British pounds, so about $250. And this is back in 1985. So I don't know what that would be equivalent.
Yeah.
Quite a lot. Because I didn't have a cigarette till I was 18. I hadn't smoked by my 18th birthday, but then a bit later I started. Right? And then I gave up once. And then I started again. And then in 2012, we were on holiday, and my wife took a call from her brother to say that her mum was diagnosed with cancer and had days to live. And we were only going to be on holiday for another 5 days, right? And we had to come home. That's how imminent it was. So we came home. But as she slumped in the hotel onto the floor in the hotel room, I thought, I can't do that.
Yeah.
I can't come home from the doctors one day and see that happen on the back of my smoking.
Yeah.
So I had a moment of clarity in that pain. And then the next thing, so we came home and we went to see her, and she was in a bad state. She was on a lot of morphine for the pain, and not making any sense at all. And it was pretty upsetting. And so I came home, I thought, I'll have a cigarette, and I'll make it out. That'll make it better. So I had the first one, and that didn't work. And then I had the second one, that didn't work. And then the third one, I thought, no, I'm done with this. And 15 minutes later, I was in what we call the chemist, what you call the drugstore, buying a little plastic thing with some nicotine in it. So my hands had something to do, so my body wasn't craving nicotine, and that's it. And that was September 2012. So for me, that's like it's the clarity. We learn at the speed of pain. It was a very painful moment, but it was actually stopping thinking about avoiding future pain. That was my thing. And so it is for me an inside job. Have you got anything similar in your change story?
I was barreling along, drinking myself silly quite a lot. And I was living with a girlfriend, and she was getting very tired of it. And I think she was getting ready to do an intervention, and she had like some of my friends on speed dial. And I didn't know that this would be the answer, but before she did the intervention one night, she was just like, "Hey, Miguel, like you really, you need to stop. Like you can't keep drinking like this." And I just said, "I know." I didn't know that I was going to say that. I didn't know on a conscious level that I was going to officially try to quit drinking. But when she said it, the answer just came out. Like the evidence had been piling up in my brain somewhere. And so that question clarified the situation. And, her love and her care and also her exasperation all led to that feeling of just like, yep, you're right, this is not tenable, and it's time to get better. And what's interesting is like the first step of all the 12 steps is I'm blanking on the goddamn first step right now. But essentially, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. We were powerless over shopping, food, blah, 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 whatever that thing may be. That that is a statement of clarity. Now, a lot of people will be in 12 step or especially be in rehab and they'll say those things because they're supposed to, but they don't really believe it. But I think, admitting it, understanding it, and getting to a point of like, that is who I am. I know this. Once you've said that, it's very hard to turn around and then pretend you are not.
Yeah. But some people are just paying it lip service, right?
Yes. I mean, like when I was in rehab, there were a bunch of kids in their 20s that were there, mostly for opioid or some sort of addiction like that. They weren't ready. Unfortunately, they were blowing through some of their parents' money. But maybe that seed gets into their brain, and on a quicker level at some point they go, oh, yeah, I know this now for sure. But if I have not had any relapses, but that's because I started at 40. If I'd have started at 25, I 100% would have relapsed. If I would have 35, maybe could have white knuckled it. But I had enough evidence. I had a storage locker full of classified files saying that I was a complete and terrible drinker.
Yeah. I sometimes talk about this book on the show, and I'm not. It's called High Risk by a guy called Ben Timberlake, and that's what I was looking at on my phone because I can't remember the guy's name off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
To cut a long story short, he becomes addicted to heroin for 5 years, and he gives up. And it's how many hours the book is, I can't remember now. I don't need to remember it. It's showing me on Audible. It's 11 hours, 7 minutes long. So how many tens of thousands of words that is, who knows? But in one sentence, he only gives one sentence to his clarity moment, right? And it's the exact opposite of step one. Because you used the word powerlessness. I can't remember exactly what he said, perhaps. But he says, so he goes to, he falls down the heroin addicts, the league table, right? So he descends through society from a comfortable, rich addict to further and further drops down, yeah. And then he gives up his heroin on the back of one humongous insight. And he only gives it one sentence in the book. And he says something like, I gave up because I realized that I was bigger than my addiction. That's the opposite of the powerlessness stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Bigger. I realized that I was bigger than my addiction. Now, one of the things that I thought about, or one of my big moments, so I have felt exactly, so you said she didn't want to keep me, your birth mother, because she knew there was something wrong with me. So my equivalent was she didn't love me enough to keep me, but with a lot of profanity and swear words in that sentence, right? So I've had that, say, a very similar kind of feeling. Right? One of the things that I found out during my research was that during my research, when I got my adoption file, finally got my adoption file, was the plan was made before I was born. So she didn't, she'd already planned, she hadn't given birth to me, looked at me like your version, and then said, oh, I'm not having Simon, or David, actually. She named me David Anthony Flower. David Anthony Flower, yeah. No wonder we get confused about identity, right? We had two names. So there you are. David Anthony Flower, yeah. So she didn't do that. And that was a big truth bomb, insight moment, clarity, epiphany, whatever. That she planned it before. It wasn't. It was a premeditated thing. It was planned ahead of time. Yeah. So I don't know what you make of it.
You know what? Going back to the Timberlake, I want to say Justin Timberlake, and my brain will never put the correct first name on there. His thing, like, he's bigger than his addiction. You know, we focus on the primal wound a lot because it's such a great clarification of things and gives an explanation. We're bigger than our wound. I think is something that is pretty cool. I struggle. I've tried all sorts of therapies and modalities and mental help of various kinds. Therapy has not worked for me. I've gone to seminars, like week-long seminars, that have helped immensely. But individual therapy feels like we're just poking that wound and saying, well, why do you feel so terrible? Poke, 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 poke. And it focuses me on the things that I feel like are wrong with me rather than on the capacity to change, even though I'm sure the therapists are saying some stuff about change. But I think it would be great just to know, like, here's this other thing. You are bigger than this problem. We are more than our molecules. I think those are both really interesting statements.
And we are. So we're at the end of my learned ability to communicate this, right? So I'm at the real edge of what I'm trying to say. So I'm pre-framing, what do they call it? I'm managing, trying to manage the expectations, right? So the two things sit perfectly well together, right? Bigger than our wound, right? So our wound is in our bodies.
Yeah.
But we are not our bodies. We are not our bodies. We are we are the space in which our bodies appear. With that's what consciousness is. So there's two modes of thoughts. The perceived wisdom is our brains are conscious. Our brains are conscious, and so the scientists are looking to address the hard problem of consciousness, which is how does sentientness come from a brain, right? And why does that happen? And they haven't found that. They haven't found that yet, and they've been looking at it for decades. The other way around is consciousness has our brain, consciousness has our body. Consciousness has our body. You know, and as I say, I'm at the end of my I'm at the end of my ability to explain this, and I'm going to link to a guy that does it very well, and to a podcast that does this, because we're running out of time. But so for me, going back to looking at the primal wound for me is, well, my first question is, what's wounded? What do you think is wounded?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that.
Okay. So I've looked at this quite a lot, right? And I say, number one, our feelings. So I talk about trauma came up with this metaphor the other week. Trauma is a toxic cocktail of insecurity, fear, and shame, I guess, and anger, but particularly shame, I think, for us adoptees, but shame. But we're the cocktail glass. We're not its contents, right? So what's wounded, number one, are our feelings, and it's a lot of this is really subconscious. So we aren't aware of the thought that leads to the feeling, because it's pre-verbal. Just did a podcast on this the other week with, let me check it out, listeners, in case you want to check it out. It was with Julie Lopez. Okay. She's an adoptee and a shrink. So what's wounded? Our feelings, our sense of self, our sense of self. But our sense of anything isn't the reality, right? And our sense of self isn't ourself. Our sense of self is what the senses can give us. The five senses can give us, and thought on top of that. The six senses can give us. But all of those senses appear within awareness. So we can't find it. We can't find awareness, because the goldfish can't see the water, and the whole thing. So what's wounded? Our feelings, our feelings and our sense of self, and so to me the primal wound is a diagnosis. Diagnosis. It's a diagnosis of a felt sense of shame, anger, insecurity, and a sense of less than self. But we're not our feelings. We're not our trauma. And that's why I am the Ted Lasso of adoption, because I've kind of seen that for myself. I'm not just parroting it.
Yeah.
You talked about the guys in the 20s. The guys in the 20s parroting, saying the things that they're expected to say. So it's like it's a thing to say. It's a nice thing to say. It's a get out of jail card. It's a get out of the AA card, or whatever it is. Yeah, but it's not their truth. And I think that the problem with any strategies or steps right? And I've not been through what you've been through, so I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying, in my world, what's driven change for me has been the insight that well, if I was primarily wounded, I talk about this a lot. Mine was a shark attack. Sorry, mine was a paper cut when the world is full of adoptees who have been by a shark. Right. So for me, the primal wound felt like a belief. A belief, and what's beliefs made? What are beliefs made out of? They're made out of thought. Well, we're not our thoughts. We're not our feelings. We're not our at different levels. You know, at essential level, we are beyond our molecules. And as I say, I'm at the end of my ability to express this.
It's hard. It's it's ineffable in a lot of ways. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there, Simon.
Well, let's explore it, and let's explore it in a few months. I'd love to.
Perfect.
Do the second one.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
You're a star, pal. And do you know what? Like, if I'd been through what you'd been through, I'd be exactly where you are.
Thank you. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And here we are.
Thanks, listeners. See you very soon. Speak to you very soon. Take care.